Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk in the upcoming minutes about Power Automate Desktop. And this is going to be a one-on-one session. So it's going to be a really rudimentary introduction to Power Automate Desktop. The agenda for this session, first I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to talk a little bit about robotic process automation, or RPA. Then I'm going to talk about Power Automate Desktop. Of course, I'm going to demo. So I'm going to show you how you can use Power Automate Desktop. And then at the end, I'll share some resources, and I'll have a Q&A at the end. But if you want, you can also ask questions in the meantime. I am okay with that as well. So first, let's start with the introduction. My name is Danial. I am the Power Platform lead at Society in the Netherlands. I am the founder of another user group that's called the Dutch Power Addicts. We recently had a rebrand because we were called the Dutch Power Apps and Flow user group. Yeah, of course, we couldn't name ourselves Flow anymore because of the recent name changes, of course. Some other thing that we don't want to rename is the Flow Pro Show. That's a YouTube channel I'm doing together with Sandy Yusha, and we have a monthly Flow Pro Show where we talk about Power Automate, and we usually invite somebody from the product team to tell us what they are creating. So last month we had, for instance, a product manager that is responsible for everything non-RPA. So all the other integrations, etc., the Dataverse connectors, etc. He is the owner of those features. And he has some really interesting things to say. And soon we'll have another episode about RPA. So make sure to check that channel out as well. So let's talk a little bit about robotic process automation. It already exists for a very, very long time. There are some big players in here. And this is actually one of the Forrester Wave pictures that you see on the right side. This came out, I believe it was 2 days ago. So it was just in time for this presentation. I believe Forrester really worked hard on getting it out before this user group. Yeah, the big players usually are UiPath, Automation Anywhere. Blue Prism used to be a really big player. Those were kind of the top three. But if you look at the image on the right side, you see that UiPath and Automation Anywhere are still in the leaders part, and Blue Prism has dropped a little bit. They are in the strong performance part. So yeah, it looks like Blue Prism is losing it a little bit. And what's really interesting as well is that Microsoft is in the leaders part, and that's for the first time, because before only the predecessor of Power Automate Desktop, which is Win Automation, and that's the tool of the company Softomotive that Microsoft acquired. Used to be on the Forrester Wave as well, but that was Softomotive, of course, and Microsoft wasn't on there. So it's really really interesting to see that Microsoft really pulls into the leaders part already when they are actually just starting. So that's really interesting to see in here. And of course, what Microsoft has that some of the others don't have is the really strong automation offering besides of RPA. So they also include the business process automation, and as Stephen Siciliano also says, the digital process automation. So the connector part is in there as well, and that's something that others don't have as strongly. So another part about robotic process automation, which I want to get out of the way before I start talking about the rest of the presentation. There typically are two types of robotic process automation. You have the unattended part and the attended part. The attended part is where you have users that are logged into a PC and where the automation process kicks off when the user is already logged in. It can happen from the cloud, for instance, or via a manual trigger by a user, or maybe a scheduled trigger. That could be the attended part. And at that moment, the user needs to stop working. So they can't keep on working on a Word document or some other thing that they are working on at that moment, because the process needs to take over and needs to use the mouse and the keyboard to enter data, for instance, or grab data from somewhere. And when you're interfering that, it will ruin the process there. So that's why unattended, unattended is actually sometimes it's really interesting. Because, for instance, in banking, sometimes there is legislation where they need to be at that process at the same time to see what actually happens. And unattended is not an option then. So what is unattended? That's when there's a virtual machine involved and no one is logged into the machine. And that means that the process will kick off again from the cloud or on a schedule, maybe. The process will log into the virtual machine. After the process finishes, it will log out. This can really work well when you want to optimize throughput. So if you want to use maybe multiple machines at the same time, so that when the RPA processes start and there's multiple people requesting that RPA process, then you can really optimize throughput in there with, for instance, gateway clusters, where you have multiple machines that can also load balance and make sure that none of the machines get all the processes in there, but it gets really evened out between all those machines. And this is something that is seen as the holy grail for a lot of companies. So yeah, a lot of people want to achieve this because unattended is the most interesting part. And that's also something that you see in most demos when people are working on that. They usually show a scenario where some RPA process will use unattended. But of course, during the demo, they will show attended because it's really cool to see an attended scenario where the computer just takes over and finishes a process. So let's talk a little bit about Power Automate. Power Automate really has grown a lot in the last couple of years. It first started with the digital process automation part, where you can have all the different connectors. I remember at first when it was Flow, a couple years back when I started, and it was still in preview, they just had a couple of connectors. And now they actually they already have more than 450 connectors available, and that's really impressive. They grow very fast with all the connectors. Next to that, you can also add custom connectors for your own APIs, of course. You can do business process management. Process mining is also something that got added to Power Automate as well. AI Builder is in there, so there's also AI in there. And of course, the RPA part is the Power Automate desktop part, what we are going to talk about today. So Power Automate really tries to achieve a point where they are the glue between old apps without APIs, for instance. So you can have the RPA side of things. And on the other hand, they also have the ability to automate modern systems that have APIs, for instance. So that's what Power Automate really wants to achieve. And yeah, when you look at the RPA side, it's usually the old apps without APIs. In the RPA side of things, there's also the possibility of automating web apps. So you can still go to a website, log in, and work from there. So it's not only old legacy apps, but you can also automate web apps. For instance, when there's no API available in there. So that's something that Power Automate is trying to achieve. I wanted to touch upon this as well, because I talked a little bit about process mining in the first slide about Power Automate. And yeah, Microsoft recently released Process Advisor, which is a way of process mining. It's not really process mining, but more of a task mining. And what you can do with that is you can create a process in Process Advisor, and then you can start recording certain tasks that you do. And it records all the times that it takes to finish that task. And when you have all those recordings, you can group all those tasks or steps that you have in that process, and then you can create all kinds of deeper insights into that process. And it's like a zero measurement, which you can do then. And after that, you can, for instance, look at all the pain points, at the things that are not going as fast as you want them to, and then you can start thinking about improving those. For now, it's only showing you the analytics on that process, how it's working now. In the future, it could be also something interesting, and I haven't seen that yet or heard about it. But I can imagine that Microsoft will go the way where they can automatically see, maybe when you're working with Excel or some kind of application and they already have a connector for that, or maybe they have some actions for that inside of the Power Automate desktop client, that they can give you some advice on automating that process already. So when they see some parts in that process that can be automated and should be automated maybe to save time, then they can give you an advice and maybe create a button where you can just click that and it will generate some process for you. At Ignite, there was an announcement about Power Automate Desktop, that Power Automate Desktop is now for free in Windows 10. And that's really an interesting move, because RPA licenses are actually pretty expensive. Yeah, that was a really surprising move by Microsoft. They announced that Power Automate Desktop will be included in insider builds, Windows 10 insider builds, from April 2021 onwards. It will eventually be included in the October release. So then it will be pre-installed inside of your Windows 10 installation. It is only for personal productivity, because you can't share your processes that you create inside of Power Automate Desktop. It will automatically save the processes that you create into the default environment. So it will still be saved to the cloud, but it will only be available to you, and you won't be able to share it with other people. So it's really something for personal productivity. One other thing that's also a limitation for the free version of Power Automate Desktop in Windows 10 is that you can trigger the processes that you create in Power Automate Desktop from the cloud. You still need a license for that. So you can upgrade your license, and then you can share it with other people. You can trigger it from the cloud, or you can, for instance, create a cloud flow where you can use a schedule trigger, and then you can, of course, trigger your Power Automate Desktop processes from there. So it is free, but it also comes at a cost. So it's not as interesting for most scenarios as you think. So within Power Automate Desktop, you have a lot of actions. You have more than 400 actions already. There's some really interesting things. You can have web and desktop applications. You can automate those. You can also automate Citrix, for instance, and VDI. applications. You have some cloud automation. So there's some Microsoft Azure things in there. For instance, there's also the computer vision capabilities from Microsoft Azure in there. Some AWS stuff as well. You can interact with databases. You can have PDF actions, etc. There's all kinds of things in there. Yeah, you can see a lot of actions that are really valuable. For instance, the scripting part is also something that you can use really well. So if you want to perform, for instance, a PowerShell script on the local machine and do something with local resources in there, you can do that as well with Power Automate Desktop capabilities. I'm not going to go over all of the actions, but I'll show you a little bit later as well. There's also some interesting monitoring options in Power Automate Desktop. So all the logs, etc., will be pushed to the cloud. They are all in Dataverse. So you can easily see which processes are running, where they are running. And also, if you have, for instance, gateway clusters, you can also see on which machines they are running. You can open the desktop flow runs and see exactly which steps have been done, so which actions have been run. Those kinds of things are available as well. And there's all kinds of logging in there, which will help you see if something has failed and why it has failed and what your error was, for instance. Yeah, the technical architecture, you can, of course, start creating from the Power Automate portal. So when you click New and Desktop Flow, it will prompt you to open Power Automate Desktop. And then you can start designing your Power Automate Desktop flow in there. And that, of course, is on premises. So it is on your machine. When you save your Power Automate Desktop process, it will automatically save it to Dataverse. So everything will be saved in Dataverse. And then, of course, from Power Automate, you can trigger your Power Automate Desktop process, and it will run through the Power Platform Gateway, and it will use the Power Automate Desktop service to execute your automation. So that's the kind of way where it's how it's going. So it starts from on-premises, it goes into Azure, so it goes into the cloud, and then it will go into on-premises again when you start running your process. So let's start and do my demo. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to show you Power Automate Desktop. And let me switch. And I hope you can give me a signal when you see my screen.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah. Okay. So what I've already done is I opened Power Automate Desktop and I opened a flow in here. That's a desktop flow. And my whole desktop flow is actually blank here. I want to automate an application, and I've got an application here that's called Contoso Invoicing. And what I want to do is I want to go to Invoices. I want to create a new invoice. I want to enter a date, an account, contact, and an amount. And I want to change the status to something. And then I want to save it again and close the application. So let's start with the first step. Of course, we need to start with the application. So what we want to do there is we want to run the application. And what I can do from here is I can enter some parameters. I'm just going to select the application in here. So when I'm going to my computer, I can go to Program Files. I can go to Contoso Inc. and I can open the legacy invoicing app. This is a direct link to that application. You can also use different actions to, for instance, get your program files directory. That can be also very useful if you want, for instance, if you want to get a special folder like a desktop folder or something like that, where you want to have the desktop folder of the logged in user. Then you can have a separate action for that and then use that as a variable in here. But now I just use the direct link. I can add some, yeah?
Daniel, could you increase the size of your font? It's actually quite small.
Ooh, let me just, I'm going to open up my, let me see. I'm going to save this. Let's do it on the fly here. I'm going to increase my resolution here. So let's do something like this. And let's open up. It's like,
yeah, that's better.
Is this better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
I hope that's good. So yeah, I already have the program files in here with the link to the program here. I can add some command line arguments, but in this case, I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to use a working folder here. I am going to use the window style because you can actually put this on maximized, and then it will open the application maximized already. So when I do this, and I'll close this one down, and I'll click on run, it will open the application and it's maximized. So this is kind of the first step of the process. Next, I would like to of course click on certain parts inside of this this application. You can use the macro recorder here. You have the desktop recorder. You also have a web recorder in here, which you can use. But in this case, I'm just going to use the UI elements part because I think that's really easy to use. So when I click this, I can add a UI element. And when I hit this, and my tracking session is in the way, but I want to select this, and I need to hold the control button, which you can see on the side here. Press control left click to add it here. So I'm going to hit the control button, and you can already see that it selected the text invoices. So that's what I want. I want to have the new record button, and it's now image. So let's click done here for now. I'm going to rename those things. So I want to have the invoices part. So I'm going to use this as a button, invoices. And I'm going to use the next button for the BTN new. So I can, from then, I can start using other things in here. So you have the UI automation part on the left side. And I can use all kinds of things in here. I can use the click UI element in window, for instance. And when I select this, I can use the button invoices part, hit select, left click. And when I would run this again, it would open up the application, and it should open the invoices part. So this is actually how it works. And I already selected the new part, of course, so I'm going to do that in a little bit as well. I'm going to select the other parts in here as well. So I'm going back to the UI elements part, add UI element. I'm going to select the date. I'm going to select the account. I'm going to select the contact. I'm going to select the amount. And I'm going to select the combo box here. And for now, I think I'm done. Of course, you need to change the names in here again. And I don't know why, but I'm not seeing the correct screenshots here. Normally, it would create a screenshot in there that I can easily see what it actually is, but it didn't create it for now. But in here, I'm going to rename this. And The first one was date. So I'm going to use this as an input date. I'm going to use this as an input. Oh, wrong one. Input account is the next one. And I can really easily rename those. And these are really handy to rename because if you're in here later on, you really want to be able to find back which UI element that actually is. So we have the amount, input amount, and I'm going to call this DRP because it's a drop down, so-called DRP status, for instance. And what you can do in here, you can click the button invoices, for instance. I can even copy paste those actions, select it and change it to BTN new, for instance, and select that one. I can really easily add those actions as well. I need to populate a text field. That's the next step that I need. So I want to input a text field in here. I can enter the date in here, for instance. So I can say 3/17/2021, for instance. I can go from there with the other parts as well. So populate text fields in here. Let's enter the account. And let's call it Microsoft. Let's call the contact. And I believe that was a email address. So let's call this satya@microsoft.com. I know he loves to get some invoices in here. The amount, well, he surely earns enough, so we can put a big amount in there. So let's call this 50,000. And yeah, then there is another thing, set drop-down list value in window. That's one of the actions here. And then I can select the drop-down status, and I can change it to a name. And in this case, I can change it to invoice, for instance. So invoiced, and I can run that. And at the end, I would want to save it. I haven't done that yet, so that's the other button I need to have there. So let's add that UI element as well, and click that one. And I can see that part as well and call it BTN save. And that's another thing I need to click, of course. This down, open it up, and call this the BTN save part. And let's now see if this will work. So let's run this, open up. It should open everything in here, enter the data, and change it, save it. And that's about it. At the end, of course, you want to close the application. That's always a nice way of doing that. You can just add that. Oh, sorry, I can add that and select something here. Let me see. I already had something in there. So let's call this console invoicing and save. And that should close it down nicely. So I can just run this, and it should enter another thing in here and save it at the end. And it closes it down as well. So that works. In this case, I have used data in here, which is static data. I can also add input variables in here, and then I can just add a count, for instance, and I can have a standard value, and enter a account. And then I can use that also inside of this this part here. And then I can just select account for the, sorry, I clicked a little bit fast, but there's here a variable part. I can double click that and then it will put it in here. And this is the way of choosing a variable. It has percentage signs around that. And when I save that, it will automatically fill it in with that part. So when I would run this now, it would change it to an invoice for Society instead of the Microsoft part. And of course, when you would trigger that from Power Automate, which I'm not going to do today, but if you would trigger it from there, you can use an input, whatever you want. So if you have a different system, like you have Dataverse, and you want to get data from there and add that to this process, you can, of course, use that as an input variable. And at the end, you could also create an output variable if you want to, for instance, get the ID from the invoice. You can grab that as well and put that back into your modern system, for instance. So this is a part of the demo that I wanted to show you. Let's close it a little bit down with the presentation, because I had some resources in there. So let me share my presentation again. There we go. So let's wait a little until it's loaded. There we go. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Demo,
Okay,
yeah.
good. Yeah, so I added some resources here. I'll share the slides after this as well. But there's a Get Started link in here where you can find lots of information about Power Automate Desktop. There's a learning path in here with Power Automate Desktop Get Started, which can help you a lot. There's a link to Automate It, which is actually a YouTube show from the Power Platform of the PowerCat team. And they will show you some really advanced examples of enterprise RPA scenarios, etc. And that's something that's really interesting as well. And also, if you want to try this out, you can, of course, register for RPA in a Day. I'm sure that in the UK, there will be some RPA in a Day workshops as well. It's probably through Teams now with the pandemic, etc. But you can also download this package and yeah, just start from there. You can easily request a tenant and yeah, start with a trial, for instance. That's what I always do when I'm giving a RPA in a Day. So that's something that you could do as well. So make sure to check those links as well. For now, yeah, it's over to Q&A. So if somebody has questions, I don't know if I have some time left, but please ask me a question if you have some.
Whilst we're waiting for people to come up with some questions, can you give us any examples where you've used this in, you know, what are your kind of business use cases?
Yeah, so I have used this a lot for yeah, like legacy WinForms applications that are still running somewhere, and they still want to use that. I've done this for scripting on SAP, for instance. So if you use an SAP environment and you want to get data from there or put data into that, you can use that as well. And what's really interesting as well is when you are using this in the combination with Cloud Flows, because I showed the inputs, for instance, for the variables. You can also have secure inputs and outputs. And what could be really interesting is when you are logging into a local system, for instance, like SAP, when you would do that, you can use Key Vault inside of the Cloud Flows. and then you can get the secrets from there, for instance, or the passwords, and you can log into to certain environments in there as well. So that's something that that's also really a well done enterprise environment. But I still think that RPA, it's really nice for legacy applications or applications that you invested a lot of money in, and you can't just turn it around to a modern application.
Yeah.
But I do prefer the digital process automation. So I would always go API first with my applications if I can. But RPA is sometimes it's something necessary, of course, because you can't just change an old school application into a modern application that is built on all kinds of modern things. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do there as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We've got questions coming in now. So Power Automate Desktop is free. Is that correct?
It's free for personal processes, like I said. So you can just install it on your machine. You can create processes, but if you want to share it or you want to trigger it from the cloud, so you want to use it in a combination with cloud flows, then you still need a license. But you can, what I just did, you can do that for free.
Excellent. There's comments coming in about, I think,
yeah, sure.
green screens we can now.
Oh yeah, that's also something that you can automate, of course.
Does it work with JRE, e.g. Oracle Forms in a Java runtime environment?
Yes, it does.
Oh, that's an easy answer.
I love those questions.
Any other questions, or have I missed any from the chat? Anybody? Have I got everything? Can multiple RPA bots, unattended flows run at the same time on one VM?
Yeah, you can do that, but you need to have multiple unattended licenses for that. So then you would have to have multiple accounts also on that machine. And then it could run simultaneous on that VM. Of course, you need to watch the CPU usage, etc. But you can do it like that. Yeah.
It's got lots more questions. Any unknown systems it doesn't work with?
Mac OS, Linux. So it only works on Windows. That's kind of the thing right now. Yeah, that's something that you could do only on Windows.
Right. Okay. How does it bound to a control, let's say an invoice table, on the system you use? Say you had another table called invoice for some reason, would it pick up the right control?
Yeah, you can actually grab the element, what I just did. So that way you can easily get the element on that application, for instance, but you can also change it to a certain area in the screen, for instance. That way you really need to look out for the changes in resolution, like I just did, because I changed my resolution. So if I would have created the process beforehand and I changed my resolution, then it would of course fail. So you need to really think about that when you do that. You can't record it in one resolution and then change it to a 4K resolution, and then it could fail, of course.
So Ollie's asking loads of questions here. I think you ought to just speak up and ask him for himself.
Can it automate mouse movement? Yes, it can. That's also a thing that they can do. And I think that's about it. So yeah, I think that's about it then.
Excellent. Thank you very much.